Hey guys, tonight we are wandering into the shimmering heat of the Nile Valley, where time isn't measured by smartphones buzzing in your pocket, but by shadows stretching across stone and sand. You can imagine yourself standing barefoot on a sun-baked courtyard, watching the great orb above you slide slowly west, while a carefully placed stone marker tells you whether it's morning work time or afternoon rest. The Egyptians didn't rush. They didn't need glowing alarms set to 6:45 a.m. sharp. They had the sun. And if the sun happened to hide behind a cloud, well, the day was simply a little more mysterious. You probably won't survive this system if you're the kind of person who panics when your Wi-Fi router takes 3 seconds to connect, but the Egyptians, they managed just fine. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening right now, drop your location and the local time in the comments. I always find it strangely soothing to know who's drifting off where in the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The earliest sundials were really just glorified sticks stuck into the ground. Gnomons, if you want the fancy term. The shadow cast by the stick shifted as the sun crossed the sky, and by marking those movements in stone, Egyptians could roughly divide the day. And when I say roughly, I mean don't expect a catch of 2:17 appointment with Pharaoh's tax collector. If the shadow pointed vaguely in the right direction, that was the hour. A mainstream fact you might find surprising is that these sundials date as far back as the 1500s BCE, centuries before many civilizations even thought about carving their own lunch knives. But here's a quirky tidbit. One of the earliest portable sundials discovered in the Valley of the Kings was small enough to fit in your hand. Imagine ancient Egyptians on the go, like, oh, I can't forget my time stick before heading to the temple. It's almost like slipping your phone in your pocket, except it only works when the sun agrees. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians truly wanted precision or whether they just needed a general sense of get to work when the shadow is here, eat when it's there, and sleep when it disappears altogether. Some claim they were meticulous, aligning monuments with solstices. Others think they simply liked the drama of the sun lining up with temple doorways, more spiritual spectacle than scientific accuracy. As you stand there in your sandals, you can picture artisans chiseling small grooves into a stone sundial, the marks faint but meaningful. The heat presses down, but you lean against a wall, watching the shadow crawl like a lazy cat across the lines. Each movement feels imperceptible, but if you stare long enough, you see the day shifting, the hours dripping like honey. You might even chuckle. Imagine an ancient student trying to explain being late to class. Sorry, the shadow didn't move fast enough. It's a hard excuse to argue with. You trace with your finger how morning begins shorter, then the day stretches, and by evening the shadows are long enough to swallow the city. It feels strangely soothing, this rhythm that doesn't care about your deadlines. You can almost feel your own pulse slow to match the creeping pace of the sun. Sometimes sundials were carved into temple walls, great slabs etched with lines pointing to noon and dusk. Picture yourself stepping into the cool shade, tracing those lines with your eyes, knowing that priests once stood where you are, waiting for the right angle of light to signal their rituals. That little slice of sunlight might decide when bread offerings were placed before a god statue. Imagine the stress. Oh no, we offered too soon. The shadow was an inch short. Yet, somehow the gods didn't seem to mind. And while the sun sets the hours for the living, you also notice the tomb walls echoing that same obsession. The dead were meant to carry the knowledge of time into eternity. Our gods, painted in sequence, marching across the walls of burial chambers. Each deity represented a fragment of the night, so that even in death, time was sliced into manageable portions, kind of like setting up your eternal sleep playlist. The desert air is still, except for a faint breeze. and you can almost hear the scrape of stone on stone as workers carved another dial into place. You squint at the horizon and realize you're not watching minutes, you're watching existence itself unfold, measured not in seconds, but in shadows. It's a system that forces patience, reminding you that time is less about precision and more about presence. And as you let the thought settle, you lean back against the warm stone and allow the shadows to creep just a little further, knowing that next section of this story is waiting with the soft dripping of water clocks. But for now, you're still here, basking in the sun's steady rhythm.
The heat of the courtyard fades now, replaced by a cool chamber where the sound is not of footsteps crunching across sand, but of water dripping, one slow bead at a time. You're standing beside a tall jar, hollowed carefully by hands long gone, filled almost to the brim with Nile water. It's dim here, no sunlight to cast shadows, but the Egyptians had no intention of losing track of time just because the sun took a break. Welcome to the soothing, almost hypnotic world of the clepsydra, the water clock. At first glance, it looks like any vessel you might drink from, but peer closely and you'll notice tiny holes carved near its bottom. Drop by drop, the water slides out into another container, and each stage of the descent was measured against marked lines inside. These markings told priests, officials, and insomniac night watchers what hour it might be, even when Sirius, the star of stars, was hidden behind clouds, or when temple corridors swallowed up all light. Here's the mainstream fact. The earliest Egyptian water clocks we know of date back to around 1500 BCE, roughly the same period as those sundials you just stood beside. They were especially handy for night rituals in temples. Imagine a sleepy priest yawning at 2 a.m., needing a reminder that it was time to light incense before the god's statue. But the quirky tidbit you probably didn't expect is that some of these clepsydras were decorated like little cosmic charts. One example, found at Karnak, has markings that don't just divide hours, they show which stars should be overhead when the water reached that level. So not only did you have a clock, you basically had an ancient star app carved into clay. Forget there's an app for that, there was a pot for that. Historians still argue whether Egyptians cared about precise equality between hours. Their hours weren't like ours, standardized and unchanging. Instead, hours in summer stretched long and lazy, while winter hours shrank to short stints. Was it about actual time, or just about keeping rhythm with nature's moods? Some scholars insist they sought accuracy. Others think it was symbolic, a ritual calendar of water and stars. Stand here with me and listen. The drip, drip, drip echoes like a heartbeat in the stone chamber. You can almost feel your own breath sinking with it, slower and slower, until it's hard to tell where your lungs end and the jar begins. Each droplet feels like an announcement, another moment has passed. But don't hurry, there are countless more to come. It's a pace that doesn't care about emails or alarms, just the faint splash, the steady rhythm of a river distilled into liquid seconds. Imagine yourself as a guard at the temple gates. Your shift is long, the night sky vast, and your eyes grow heavy. Instead of glancing at your watch, you shuffle into the chamber, light a torch, and squint at the water level. The priests told you, when the water drops to the third line, ring the gong. So you do, slowly, reluctantly. The gong reverberates into the sleeping city. Somewhere, a scribe notes that time has moved on, and you wonder if anyone is really awake to care. Of course, things go wrong. The water sometimes evaporates in the desert heat, or worse, froze during a freak cold night. What then? You're stuck with a broken clock, staring at a bowl of stubbornly unmoving water. You might laugh to yourself, of course my shift breaks down on the one time I actually need it. Some problems never change. The chamber is cool, the walls damp in places, and if you close your eyes, you can almost imagine the slow trickle as a lullaby. Somewhere far above, the stars rotate across the sky, oblivious to your watery countdown. It's strange to think about, this desire to pin down something as slippery as time with something equally slippery, like water. Yet somehow it worked. You run a hand over the jar's rim, the clay smoothed by centuries, and you realize this wasn't just technology, it was comfort. The priests needed reassurance that even in darkness, time hadn't abandoned them. The slow dripping meant continuity, a reminder that rituals could be trusted to fall into place. So you linger there, breathing evenly, waiting for the next droplet, knowing that when it falls, you're one moment closer to stepping outside and tilting your head to the stars, where another kind of Egyptian timekeeping waits to guide you.
You step outside again, leaving behind the echo of dripping water, and the night air greets you like a soft blanket. Overhead, the Egyptian sky stretches wider than you expect, a velvet expanse scattered with stars. Out here, time doesn't trickle in jars or crawl across sundial stones. It blazes above you in constellations. Your eyes trace the river of the Milky Way, and somewhere to the east you spot Sirius, the star the Egyptians watched like a nightly heartbeat. Here's your mainstream fact. Sirius, the brightest star in the sky, was central to Egyptian calendars. Each year, its heliacal rising, when it appeared just before dawn, signaled the coming of the Nile's flood. That single astronomical event was basically their New Year's Eve. The moment farmers perked up, priests announced, and scribes sharpened their reed pens. Forget confetti and champagne. Egypt celebrated with irrigation ditches and baskets of grain. But the quirky tidbit you might not expect is that some Egyptians thought of Sirius almost as a celestial cow. Yes, really. Linked to the goddess Hathor, often depicted as a cow or cow-headed figure, the star became a kind of heavenly udder dripping nourishment down to the Nile Valley.
The stars are still bright when you rise again, brushing sand off your tunic and stretching your back. Tonight, though, instead of temples and polished priests, you wander into the fields, where life is timed not by sun shadows or star risings, but by something altogether earthier: cows. Yes, the humble cow, lowing softly in the distance, turns out to be one of the best clocks in ancient Egypt. You walk down a dirt track and hear the slow clop of hooves. In the dim light, you see farmers guiding their herds back to pens. The rhythm is unhurried, predictable, almost as steady as that water clock drip you left behind. Egyptians didn't need spreadsheets to plan their day. They had livestock habits, and those habits never skipped a beat. Here's the mainstream fact. Cattle were the backbone of Egypt's agricultural economy. They weren't just food sources. Their daily routines helped structure farm life. When the cows were led to pasture in the early morning, it meant the day's work had begun. When they returned at dusk, weary and heavy with milk, it signaled the end. Farmers looked at the herd the way you might glance at a clock face. Ah, the cows are restless, must be nearly noon. And here's your quirky tidbit. Egyptians sometimes used cattle count as a form of taxation record. A king's wealth could be measured by the number of cattle he owned, tallied during great cattle counts that doubled as national censuses. So, in a strange way, your daily timetable was also a tax form. Imagine an official arriving at your farm, clipboard in hand, and saying, "Nice herd. Also, time to pay up." Nothing like a government cow clock to keep you awake. Historians still argue whether farmers truly organize their days primarily around livestock, or whether this is just a romantic idea we moderns project backward. Some scholars suggest farmers relied more on bells or signals from overseers in fields, while others argue that the animals' stubborn regularity made them the most reliable reminder of when to get moving. The debate lingers, like the faint smell of dung in the barnyard air. You watch as a young herdsman pats the flank of a cow, guiding it toward the pen. The cow lumbers slowly, chewing grass, unbothered by the rising night chill. Around you, the chorus of animals fills the air, bleating goats, honking geese, braying donkeys. The whole soundscape is a rural symphony, and each note carries a kind of timestamp. The donkeys bray loudest in the early dawn. The geese squabble near midday. By evening, the cow's lowing turns into a background hum that blends with crickets. The scent of hay mixes with the faint sweetness of date palms. You picture yourself as a weary farmer, rising before the sun, not because your phone alarm went off, but because the cows were already awake and mooing loud enough to rattle your nerves. You trudge out barefoot, tie up the oxen, and realize time is measured not by devices, but by chores waiting to be done. The cows are hungry, therefore it is morning. Honestly, it's a foolproof system, though not one that allows for sleeping in. It strikes you as funny. Today people complain about their cat pawing at them at 5 a.m., but 3,000 years ago, your entire work schedule depended on an animal's stubborn stomach. You chuckle. Sorry, boss, I'm late. The cow overslept. Somehow you doubt the overseer would buy that excuse. A breeze carries the smell of fresh dung, sharp and earthy, and you wince slightly. Ancient Egypt was not glamorous on the ground level, but even this smell is a kind of timekeeper. Fresh dung meant morning, when animals were driven out. Drying dung told you the day was halfway gone. By night, the air grew clearer, the scent fading as animals settled. It's as though every sense, sight, sound, and smell, contributed to your awareness of hours. You squat by the pen, running your hand through the dust. The cows settle into rhythmic chewing, tails swishing lazily. Their predictability is oddly comforting. No ticking clock, no glowing digits, just the sound of breath and cud, a rhythm older than pyramids. And as you lean back against the wooden fence, you realize how this system anchored daily existence. Hours weren't abstract, they were alive, mooing and shuffling around you. It's the kind of timekeeping you can feel in your bones, slow and steady, demanding patience. And while you're tempted to close your eyes and drift off with the herd, the story isn't finished yet. Ahead, a far more elaborate clock waits, the strict, sunlit schedule of the pharaoh himself.
The cows fade into the distance, their lowing softening like background static, and you find yourself walking toward the shimmering gates of the royal palace. Dust settles beneath your sandals as you step into a world where time is not just about shadows and animals, but about ceremony, politics, and an exhausting calendar of duties. Welcome to the pharaoh's daily schedule, a life so precisely arranged by the sun's journey that you might need a nap just thinking about it. First, the mainstream fact. Pharaohs, especially in the New Kingdom, had highly ritualized days that revolved around religious and administrative duties. At sunrise, the ruler was expected to participate in morning temple rites, presenting offerings to gods, reaffirming divine favor, and ensuring the kingdom's harmony. Imagine starting your morning not with coffee, but with chanting priests, incense smoke, and the pressure of literally keeping the universe in balance. No pressure. Here's the quirky tidbit. Sources suggest the pharaoh's morning routine also included being ritually washed and dressed by attendants. We're talking several layers of linen, elaborate jewelry, and yes, even cosmetics.
Picture the ruler sitting there, stone-faced, while a servant delicately applies eyeliner thicker than any Instagram influencer could dream of. You can almost hear Pharaoh muttering, "A little more coal on the left, please. I've got an audience with Amun today." Historians still argue whether pharaohs genuinely followed such rigid schedules every day, or whether these accounts were more ceremonial ideals recorded by scribes. Some scholars say the ruler probably skipped a few rituals now and then, especially if he was busy with war or political drama. Others believe the daily rhythm was non-negotiable, since the pharaoh's presence in rituals symbolized cosmic order. Either way, you're left picturing the tension, a monarch torn between paperwork and sacred eyeliner duty. As you shuffle through the palace corridors, the air cool and heavy with incense, you notice the order of things. Guards bow stiffly, courtiers whisper like a hive of bees, scribes scurry with scrolls under their arms. Every action is carefully timed. Midday brings audiences with officials, petitions from weary farmers, and long recitations of taxes collected from villages. You imagine Pharaoh stifling a yawn, nodding sagely, and occasionally thinking, "Why didn't I stay in bed with my eyeliner on?" Beyond the throne room, the palace kitchens buzz. Cooks prepare elaborate meals at predictable times, roasting duck, baking bread, pouring beer into jars. Their schedule is as clock-like as any sundial. Breakfast offered after morning rites, lunch served between audiences, supper timed to the final prayers at dusk. You lean in to sniff the air and catch a whiff of honey cakes. Suddenly, you realize this is the best part of the pharaoh's schedule. No wonder the gods were always offered food first. By late afternoon, the palace becomes quieter, the sun casting golden rectangles across tiled floors. Officials retreat, petitions fade, and the pharaoh is led again to temple courtyards, where shadows stretch long against walls carved with stories of gods and kings. You step closer, feeling the heat of the stone as the ruler raises hands in prayer. The sun is setting, and with it, the day's balance must be reaffirmed. If he misses this, people believe chaos might creep in. That's a lot of pressure for someone still digesting honey cakes. And as night falls, the schedule doesn't entirely stop. Evening banquets, music, dancing, and performances might fill the hours. Harp strings plucked softly, dancers swaying, servants pouring wine. It's less about partying and more about displaying royal power, though to you it feels like a well-earned wind-down. Imagine yourself there, yawning discreetly as musicians play the same soothing tune they played the night before and the one before that. Ancient playlists had no shuffle button. You lean against a cool column, watching the ruler glide through this daily machinery of ritual and repetition. The hours of Pharaoh's life aren't his own. They're stitched together by religion, politics, and expectation. You feel a little sympathy. Even kings couldn't ignore the clock. The difference was, their clocks weren't just sticks in the sand or dripping jars. Their clock was the entire kingdom, ticking along to the steady movement of the sun. You close your eyes briefly, the scent of incense wrapping around you like a blanket, the low hum of conversations drifting past. And in that moment, you realize the irony. Pharaoh's schedule was designed to keep the cosmos orderly, but to you, it feels like the perfect recipe for a nap.
The palace halls fade into silence, and when you open your eyes again, you're no longer among courtiers and incense smoke, but in the open air, walking along dusty paths where the stone cliffs of Thebes rise around you. Here, the workers toil in quarries and at temple sites, chiseling blocks, hauling loads, and leaving behind the thunder of hammers echoing against limestone. And even in this clamor, time is marked, this time by bells, shouts, and the rhythm of labor itself. Here's your mainstream fact. In the New Kingdom, construction projects were monumental affairs, often employing thousands of workers at once. These men didn't have personal sundials dangling from their belts. Instead, overseers used sound, horns, claps, even bells to mark the beginnings and pauses of shifts. Imagine a foreman bellowing across the quarry, "Drop your chisels, it's midday!" The roar of the crowd quiets, not because they had wristwatches, but because they trusted the sound signal. Now for your quirky tidbit. Archaeologists have found evidence suggesting that at some temple sites, workers might have used clapping signals with large wooden boards or even hollow jars struck like drums to mark the work rhythm. So instead of a whistle while you work, it was more like a deep, booming thunk, thunk, carrying across the valley. Somewhere out there, the first factory punch clock might just have been a very loud jar. Historians still argue whether these signals were truly standardized or if they were improvised by each overseer. Was there a strict bell system throughout the kingdom, or did it depend on whichever foreman had the loudest voice? Some claim these time cues were rigid and regulated. Others believe they were flexible, more about keeping workers in line than accurately tracking hours. You can picture two historians shaking their heads at each other. "No, it was definitely a bell. No, it was definitely a drum." Meanwhile, the workers back then probably didn't care. They just wanted shade and water. You step closer to the quarry wall. Dust rises in clouds, coating your tongue, making you cough lightly. Men swing mallets, stone chips fly, and above it all, you hear the faint clang of a bell, or the sharp crack of wood. Instantly, chisels drop. The sound of labor halts like a switch turned off. You feel the sudden silence, almost startling after the constant hammering. It's not a Rolex moment, but it's effective. The overseer waves a hand, and workers shuffle to the side, sitting in patches of shade, pulling bread from baskets, drinking water carried in skin bags. This pause is timed, you realize, not by the sun's exact position, but by an audible rhythm that paces the entire workday. It's strangely comforting, knowing the whole site breathes together, labor and rest woven into a single schedule of sound. You chuckle to yourself, imagining a modern office adopting the same method. Instead of calendar alerts, someone just bangs a giant clay pot whenever it's time for lunch. Thud! "Okay, everyone, drop your emails. It's sandwich o'clock." Honestly, it might be less stressful. The workers talk softly as they eat, the murmur blending with the rustle of palm trees. You watch a man wipe sweat from his brow, lean back against the quarry wall, and close his eyes for a few stolen minutes. His body knows the rhythm, the length of a pause, the moment to rise again. He doesn't need to measure seconds. He trusts the bell will call him back. Farther away, you see temple builders in Thebes working by similar cues. Imagine the steady beat of mallets as scaffolding rises, then the deep boom signaling a shift change. All of this noise creates an invisible clock, not seen or held, but heard and obeyed. It's less about minutes, more about collective breath, ensuring the labor of thousands stays aligned. The sun begins to sink, shadows stretching long across the cliffs. Another signal rings out, and the workers shuffle back toward their homes, sandals dragging, tools slung over their shoulders. The site grows quiet, except for the occasional call of a nightbird. You linger for a moment, breathing in the dust and heat, letting the rhythm of their day wash over you. And you realize, whether it's sundials, dripping jars, restless cows, or ringing bells, each method of timekeeping is less about exact seconds and more about keeping people moving together, in harmony.
The quarry fades into dusk now, but the debate over whether Egyptians prized precision or ritual still lingers in the background, waiting to be picked up in the next chapter of your journey.
Hey guys, tonight we step straight into the dusty streets of ancient Egypt. Imagine the sun hanging like a copper disk in the morning sky, warming your shoulders as you shuffle down uneven paths where mud brick houses lean against one another like drowsy neighbors. The air is dry, heavy with the smell of bread baking and the faint whiff of animals penned nearby. You hear traders calling out their wares, linen, figs, copper bracelets, while scribes mutter under their breath as they balance ledgers, quills scratching like restless beetles. For a moment, you're right there, shoulder to shoulder with thousands of Egyptians just trying to make it through another hot day. And yes, you probably wouldn't last long without a wide hat, gallons of water, and the patience of a camel. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, tell me your location and your local time in the comments. I love knowing where and when you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin your walk through Memphis, one of the great cities of ancient Egypt. The streets are narrow, packed with market stalls draped in colorful fabrics. Chickens dart between baskets of onions, and children chase one another through the dust, giggling before being called back sternly by mothers who have far too much laundry to haul to the Nile. A donkey brays like it's auditioning for a musical you never asked to attend, and you wonder how anyone gets any sleep around here. Yet to the Egyptians, this clamor is the heartbeat of their day. You pass scribes hunched over wooden writing boards. Being a scribe is one of the most prestigious jobs available, and these young men have spent years memorizing signs that look like little owls, reeds, and snakes. To you, it just looks like someone doodled too close to bedtime, but it's actually the backbone of Egyptian record-keeping. Without them, no one would know how many baskets of grain belonged in the granaries or how many bricks you owed for the king's latest construction project. Historians still argue whether literacy was as rare as elite propaganda made it seem, or whether far more common folk knew their way around a papyrus scroll than the officials let on. One mainstream fact here is simple. Memphis was one of the oldest and most significant cities of Egypt, serving as a capital for centuries. Its temples and palaces once gleamed in the sun, though now only fragments remain. Walking its streets, you'd find busy workshops where craftsmen chipped away at amulets, statues, or stone jars with a patience that would make even your dentist proud. But let's not miss the quirky details. Ever heard of the beer brewing neighborhoods? Archaeological finds suggest some quarters of Egyptian cities produced beer in astonishing quantities. The fermentation process gave off a thick, yeasty smell, mixing in the hot air with incense from nearby shrines. You, walking through, would probably feel tipsy just from the aroma. Egyptians loved their beer. It wasn't just a party drink, but a safe, everyday beverage, since Nile water alone wasn't exactly spa quality. You pause near the docks along a canal where boats made from bundled papyrus reeds bob gently. The water glints as fishermen haul up nets wriggling with tilapia, while cats, those ever-divine freeloaders, wait for scraps. A boy calls out, hawking small amulets of Bes, the dwarf god who's supposed to protect against evil spirits, and apparently against bad hair days too. As you shuffle onward, the sun grows hotter. You notice the simple homes, their walls plastered in mud and whitewashed to reflect the heat. Some roofs are flat, with stairs leading upward, and you spot women drying fish or laying out laundry on top. Roofs were the Egyptian version of an evening patio, a place to cool off after the blazing day. Modern city dwellers might pay extra for a rooftop bar. Egyptians just carried up a jug of beer and made do. Inside the houses, rooms are sparse. A low bed of woven reeds here, a clay jar for water there, maybe a painted box to hold jewelry. Dogs laze in doorways, tails thumping gently, keeping an eye out for unwelcome strangers. The cool interiors must feel like bliss after all that sun. But don't imagine everything was serene. The streets also echoed with the sounds of quarrels over taxes, noisy disputes about property lines, and the constant complaints about how the latest official measured grain unfairly. One fringe tidbit suggests that Egyptians even had professional complainers or petitioners, people who specialized in lodging endless grievances before local courts. Imagine making a career out of whining. It might sound familiar if you've ever read online reviews at night. And what of the palace? Looming in the distance, the royal compound casts a reminder that Pharaoh, the living god, rules over this buzzing anthill of a city. His presence might be unseen, but his statues, carved in gleaming limestone, stare down streets like traffic wardens. You're just a small figure in this grand machine, part of a society that will still be building pyramids, carving hieroglyphs, and chanting prayers long after your sandals wear out. As the day slides toward noon, you feel the press of heat and dust, your eyelids drooping. The world hums with ordinary, timeless sounds of sandals scraping stone, the slap of a paddle against water, and a lull of cicadas in the fields just outside the walls. Even in the chaos, there's something hypnotic, a rhythm that draws you to sleep. You're there, moving among them, part of a vast and ancient city that somehow feels both overwhelming and oddly soothing, like a lullaby made of sand, sun, and chatter.
The morning sun edges higher, and with it comes the rumble of empty stomachs. You trail after a group of workers heading toward the fields and construction sites, watching them unwrap their simple breakfasts. No, it's not a pyramid of pancakes or a buffet with bacon, though you might wish it were. Instead, the air smells of barley bread, a little rough around the edges, an onion, pungent enough to wake even the sleepiest laborer. This is the fuel of ancient Egypt, and as you chew along with them in your imagination, the dust of the quarry clings to your lips like an uninvited condiment. One solid historical fact: pyramid builders were not slaves chained to the stones. They were hired laborers, often farmers working during the flood season when their fields lay underwater. They lived in nearby worker villages, complete with bakeries, breweries, and even medical clinics. Archaeologists have uncovered rows of ovens that once churned out loaves day after day, proving these men were fed well enough to keep hauling limestone without collapsing. And yet, quirky details abound. Bread here wasn't exactly the soft sourdough you'd find at a cafe. It was coarse, filled with husks and sometimes stray grit from grinding stones. Imagine biting into a crust and feeling your teeth scrape against sand. Dental remains from Egypt reveal ground-down molars, sometimes abscessed, leaving no doubt that bread was both staple and curse. You might call it the world's first crunchy granola bar, but without the sweetness. As you picture yourself chewing, you notice the workers sipping mugs of beer alongside their meal. Not frothy golden lagers, but a thick, porridge-like brew, closer to liquid bread than happy hour drink. It's refreshing, nutritious, and far safer than Nile water. Historians still argue whether this beer was mildly alcoholic or strong enough to keep the laborers in a perpetual buzz. Either way, when you're lifting multi-ton blocks in desert heat, a little buzz might not be the worst thing. Nearby, a boy scampers around with a tray of dried dates and figs, treats to break up the monotony. He shouts about their sweetness, exaggerating like a modern street vendor. You take a fig and imagine the syrupy taste sticking to your teeth. That burst of sugar, combined with bread and beer, could almost pass for an Egyptian breakfast combo meal. The only thing missing is coffee, though you'd have to wait a couple thousand years for that invention. The workers sit cross-legged, talking quietly between bites. They joke about the foreman, mock one another's beards, and debate whether the pharaoh's newest pyramid will ever be finished. Someone insists it's doomed to collapse. Another swears it will outlast eternity itself. Historians still argue whether the pyramids were feats of flawless planning or the result of endless trial and error, workers adjusting angles as they went, guided more by stubbornness than perfection. One man, wiping his mouth with the back of his dusty hand, pulls out a tiny amulet. He presses it against his bread before taking another bite, as though blessing the food. Quirky? Yes, but not uncommon. Egyptians filled their world with protective charms, believing even meals deserved spiritual backup. You imagine what kind of amulet you'd keep, maybe one to ward off stale crusts or sand stuck between your molars. The smell of roasted garlic wafts by, sharp enough to tickle your nose. Garlic and onions were not only food, but medicine, believed to strengthen the body and even the soul. Workers carried them tucked in belts or necklaces as talismans of stamina. You might scoff, but modern studies suggest garlic really does boost circulation, so maybe those quarry haulers had science on their side. Plus, they smelled like a walking stew. The breakfast scene is humble, but there's dignity in it. These men are not nameless slaves, but families, fathers and sons. After eating, they rise slowly, brushing crumbs from their tunics, stretching their arms as the sun climbs higher. Dust clings to their legs like second skin. The quarries call, and soon they'll be tugging ropes, levering stones, and chanting in rhythm to haul blocks up ramps. For now, though, they're just tired humans with bellies full of bread and beer, joking about whether the overseer's wig looks more like a mop or a dote's tail. You walk with them as they gather tools, wooden mallets, copper chisels, and simple ropes. The sound of their chatter and laughter rolls like music across the desert. For all the sweat, dust, and aching muscles ahead, their morning meal ties them together, filling the silence with warmth and camaraderie. You realize this, too, is part of the great Egyptian miracle. Not just the stone monuments, but the ordinary breakfasts that fueled them. As the workers shoulder their baskets and trudge toward the pyramids, the last crumbs of bread scatter in the sand, food for sparrows who flutter down gratefully. The smell of beer and onion lingers in the air, oddly comforting, like the aroma of someone else's kitchen drifting through an open window. You follow, now slower, the heat settling into your bones, lulled by the rhythm of footsteps and the faint burp of a satisfied worker who clearly had one sip too many.
You wander away from the busy heart of Memphis, letting the sound of traders fade until all you can hear is the hush of the Nile flowing nearby. The river is Egypt's pulse, and in the early morning it hums with activity. Fishermen already stand and reed boats, their linen kilts tucked high, balancing like acrobats while tossing nets in wide arcs that slap the surface with a sleepy splash. Their shouts echo across the water as they haul in wriggling fish, enough to feed families or to trade for baskets of barley. You're struck by how much of daily life is tied to this single ribbon of water. Without it, there's no food, no trade, no Egypt at all. On the banks, women bend to rinse clothes, rhythmically beating fabric against smooth stones, their laughter mixing with the chatter of geese nearby. Children splash in the shallows, chasing after frogs and occasionally shrieking when they brush too close to the reeds. You notice one boy hurling pebbles at the water, only to scurry back when a crocodile's eyes break the surface like two gleaming pebbles of their own. You think about joining the kids, but then again, crocodiles don't care about your bedtime story. They're only interested in breakfast. One firm historical fact is clear. The Nile's seasonal flooding dictated everything. The inundation left behind rich silt that made farming possible, and Egyptians scheduled festivals, harvests, and even taxes around its rhythm. This predictable flooding gave them food security other ancient peoples could only dream of. But historians still argue whether common farmers celebrated the inundation wholeheartedly or sometimes dreaded it. After all, if the waters rose too high, homes might wash away, and if they stayed too low, famine lurked on the horizon. Meanwhile, quirky daily rituals filled these mornings. Did you know some Egyptians believed washing your face with Nile water had spiritual cleansing power? Of course, if you did that today, your dermatologist might not approve. Still, the symbolic act of rinsing at dawn tied people to both gods and earth, blending hygiene with devotion. You notice a man leading oxen down to drink, their massive horns glinting in the light.
He mutters softly to them, almost like lullabies, his voice carrying across the water. Egyptians treated cattle with a mix of practicality and reverence. They were tools, wealth, and sometimes sacrifices. But in these quiet moments by the river, they're simply thirsty animals, snorting as they push their noses into the cool stream. Not far off, washerwomen gossip as they slap garments against stones. They share news about neighbors, complain about stubborn husbands, and swap remedies for everything from stomach aches to warding off evil eyes. One woman swears by garlic cloves strung like jewelry to scare away bad spirits. Another argues onions are stronger protection. Historians still argue whether this onion-garlic rivalry was practical medicine, folk superstition, or just an early version of petty culinary debate. Either way, you're reminded that humans have always loved to argue about food. And then there are the crocodiles. Egyptians both feared and worshipped them, associating the reptiles with the god Sobek. Temples even kept tame crocodiles, adorned with jewelry and fed the best cuts of meat. So when you glimpse a fisherman tossing a small fish into the reeds, you wonder, is he just discarding scraps, or is he quietly appeasing a god with scales? It's a thought that lingers as you watch the water ripple in circles. The river smells of mud and sweet reeds, with hints of fish drying in the sun. The air is cooler here than in the streets, touched with morning mist. Your feet sink slightly in the damp earth, and you notice a pair of sandals abandoned nearby. Perhaps someone lost them while running away from a cranky goose. And speaking of geese, these birds are everywhere. They waddle along the banks, honking like irritated old men, poking their beaks into baskets and earning annoyed swats from farmers. Yet Egyptians loved them enough to keep them as food and pets, often painting geese with great care on tomb walls. You might not be impressed by a honking goose, but to them it was worth eternal decoration. Further downstream, a group of boys float papyrus reed toy boats, racing them as if the Nile were a grand stadium. Their laughter rings out as one boat tips dramatically, sinking in slow motion. You smile, realizing that childhood competitions haven't changed much in 4,000 years. It's just today's version is kids dropping smartphones into swimming pools. You find yourself lulled by the rhythm of life along the Nile. Nets slap, water splashes, geese honk, oxen snort. It's an orchestra of the ordinary. And while it may seem mundane, this very routine is what made Egypt endure for millennia. Without these fishermen, washerwomen, farmers, and their crocodile-dodging children, the grand temples and pyramids would never have existed. As the sun climbs higher, heat rolls over the banks. Fishermen head back with their morning catch, washerwomen gather their damp linens, and the children finally scatter toward home, dragging their toy boats behind them. The crocodile sinks back under the surface, leaving only ripples behind, as if erasing itself from the story until another morning. You linger, feeling the hum of the river settle in your bones. The Nile flows endlessly, soft and steady, carrying with it the sound of ancient life. It's oddly comforting, like a lullaby hummed by water itself, reminding you that just as day follows night, the river keeps flowing, and people keep waking up to its call.
You leave the quarry dust behind and drift into a quieter courtyard where a different sort of preparation takes place. Here, life isn't about hauling limestone blocks. It's about wigs, perfumes, and cosmetics, the ancient tools of presentation and pride. Egyptians took appearance seriously, not in a shallow way, but as a reflection of health, status, and even spiritual balance. You glance around and see women, men, even children, being fussed over with brushes, oils, and delicate jars filled with powders. It's a beauty salon without neon signs or soft jazz music, but the hum of chatter feels just the same. One hard fact: Egyptians pioneered cosmetics not just for vanity, but for practicality. Kohl, black eyeliner made from soot and galena, was applied thickly around the eyes. It wasn't just a style choice. Studies suggest it helped reduce infections and shielded eyes from the desert glare. Think of it as sunscreen and sunglasses combined, but with far more flair.
You watch as a young woman leans forward, a servant carefully dragging a reed applicator across her eyelids. Her lashes flutter, and suddenly her eyes gleam dramatically against her sun-bronzed skin. She smiles faintly, and you realize the style feels timeless. You've seen the same smoky eye in modern fashion magazines, though rarely explained as an ancient anti-eye infection hack. And then there are the wigs. Real hair is shaved short, partly for hygiene, partly to survive the heat. On special days, however, a wig transforms you from an ordinary neighbor into someone important. Beeswax, sheep fat, or resin is used to hold elaborate curls in place. From afar, it looks elegant. Up close, well, you can smell the beeswax softening in the sun, and you wonder if wearing one felt like balancing a slightly warm, slightly sticky loaf of bread on your head. Egyptians didn't seem to mind. For them, wigs carried dignity and sometimes even divine protection. Historians still argue whether only the wealthy wore these wigs, or if more modest households managed simpler versions. Some evidence suggests clay or fiber wigs were available for those who couldn't afford the deluxe beeswax edition. Imagine saving up for a new wig the way people save for sneakers today. Though instead of limited edition Jordans, you're aiming for goat hair with resin, model 1420 BCE. Perfumes, too, saturate the air. Jars of fragrant oils line wooden tables. Myrrh, frankincense, and sandalwood blended with fat to make balms. Someone dabs a little on your wrist, and instantly the sharp, resinous scent cuts through the musty courtyard air. Egyptians believed good smells kept evil spirits away. You can't help but think it also kept evil odors away, which, let's be honest, was probably more urgent in a hot, crowded city. A quirky tidbit pops up here. Cones of perfumed wax worn on heads during banquets. Yes, literal wax cones balanced on wigs, slowly melting in the heat and releasing fragrance. Archaeologists long debated whether this was a symbolic art thing, or if people really walked around with mini candles dripping perfume into their hair. Recent evidence suggests they were real, though perhaps not an everyday look. Imagine trying to chat casually while warm wax trickles down your scalp. You'd either feel indulgent or just sticky. A group of men sit off to the side, rubbing scented oils into their skin. Egyptians considered oily skin beautiful and healthy, a way to resist the drying desert winds. You watch one man stretch luxuriously, gleaming like he's ready for a sports commercial, though all he's really ready for is a long day counting grain or arguing in court. Meanwhile, a child fidgets while her mother dabs a green paste under her eyes. The paste, made from malachite, is thought to protect against infections and maybe even magical curses. The girl sighs dramatically, bored with the process, and you chuckle softly, because kids never change. 2,000 years later, they'll still roll their eyes at sunscreen or medicine. You notice servants carefully storing cosmetics in small carved jars, some made of alabaster or decorated with lotus motifs. To the Egyptians, these weren't just beauty tools. They were symbols of wealth and order. Many people were even buried with makeup kits, ensuring they'd look their best in the afterlife. You imagine eternity with perfectly winged eyeliner. At least you'd go out in style. One man nearby strokes his chin, inspecting a new false beard. Pharaohs wore them as symbols of divine power, often braided and hooked onto the face with straps. They weren't about hiding patchy growth, though maybe that helped too, but about linking rulers with the gods. You picture yourself strapping one on, instantly transforming into someone regal, only to sneeze and have it wobble off at a terrible angle. Divine dignity gone in an instant. The courtyard buzzes with friendly chatter, punctuated by the scrape of applicators in coal pots and the faint sizzling of beeswax softened over coals. The air is thick with perfume, smoky incense, and just a hint of sweat. You feel drowsy watching it all, the slow strokes of brushes, the patient braiding of wigs, the rhythm of everyday care stretched out into timeless ritual. By the time the preparations end, faces gleam, eyes sparkle, wigs shine, and the whole courtyard smells like a spice bazaar. You trail after them as they head back into the city, looking utterly transformed. What strikes you isn't the glamour, but the ordinary humanity of it, the same blend of pride, insecurity, and ritual we still live with today. And as the last drops of oil gleam on sunlit skin, you feel yourself lulled by the gentle hum of self-care that echoes across the centuries. By now, the heat presses down like a heavy blanket, and you shade your eyes with one hand as you step into a field where workers are slathering something suspicious on their arms. At first glance, it looks like mud. Then you notice the smell, a sharp, earthy tang mixed with something faintly unpleasant. You squint, realizing you're watching people rub a concoction of crocodile dung and fermented plant matter across their skin. This, you realize, is sunscreen, or at least their best attempt at it. You're grateful for modern SPF, but the Egyptians seem determined to improvise. One fact historians agree on: the Egyptian sun was brutal, and protection was necessary. They wore lightweight linen and wide collars, but bare skin still faced the rays. Mixtures of animal fats, oils, and plant extracts often doubled as moisturizers and sun barriers. Crocodile dung is one of those stranger recipes mentioned in later texts, though scholars still argue whether it was ever widespread or more symbolic, some quirky remedy offered to wealthy households with access to crocodiles. Either way, imagine sitting under the sun with that smeared across your shoulders, trying to look dignified. The smell aside, you can almost admire the creativity. These people experimented constantly with mixtures. Oils from castor beans, sesame, and moringa were common, along with red ochre rubbed on cheeks not just for beauty, but for added protection. In effect, they layered style and survival together, wearing cosmetics like a second skin against the desert. Nearby, a farmer sits with his sandals off, coating his feet in a mixture of honey and animal fat, muttering about cracked heels. You wrinkle your nose at the stickiness, but honey was a prized healing agent. The Egyptians knew it slowed infections, and modern science nods in agreement. A quirky little miracle hidden in the same ingredient you'd drizzle on toast. Children chase each other in the dust, their heads gleaming with oil that serves as both sunblock and pest repellent. One boy, gleeful, smears his face with more than he probably needs, ending up shiny as a polished jar. His mother sighs, scrubs at him with a cloth, and the crowd chuckles. Clearly, kids wasting sunscreen isn't a new phenomenon. It's been happening for millennia. Historians still debate how much of these recipes were daily habits versus ritual acts tied to gods and magic. Was crocodile dung really believed to protect, or was it more about invoking Sobek, the crocodile god, for strength? A mixture of science and faith ran through all Egyptian remedies. After all, if you believed the gods guarded you, maybe you felt cooler even when the sun baked your shoulders. As the heat rises, you find shade beneath a palm tree, watching people reapply their concoctions. The mixture glistens in the sunlight, creating an odd shimmer, almost like scales. Perhaps that was intentional, a way of blending with nature, wearing the shimmer of the Nile's creatures as armor against the day. A merchant strolls by, carrying jars of perfumed oil. He shouts about their benefits, comparing his wares to ordinary dung-based remedies. You suppress a laugh, realizing you've just witnessed the world's first sunscreen marketing battle. The crowd gathers, sniffing the jars, bartering over prices, and choosing between smells like roses and smells like crocodile enclosure. The choice, you suspect, is an easy one. You lean back, lulled by the mix of voices and the sound of cicadas buzzing in the reeds. The smell isn't exactly relaxing, though if you focus on the myrrh and sandalwood oils, you can almost pretend. Still, part of you can't stop thinking about the unfortunate worker whose job it was to collect crocodile dung in the first place. Imagine telling your family that's your career, official crocodile collector. Sleepy or not, that's a title no resume should have to bear. And yet, it worked in its way. Oils, fats, and strange mixtures shielded skin, warded off insects, and gave people the comfort of feeling prepared against the desert. Beneath the humor lies a truth. Survival often depends on strange creativity. Even if the method smells awful, it represents resilience, trial and error, the constant negotiation between human bodies and a sun that never stops shining. The day stretches on, the air shimmering with heat. Farmers wipe their brows, women adjust their headscarves, and children dart between patches of shade, still shiny with oil. You feel your own skin prickle in sympathy,
grateful for your imaginary sunscreen, though maybe you'll pass on the crocodile dung recipe. Instead, you let yourself be carried along by the gentle rhythm of everyday care, the buzz of insects, and the occasional squawk of a goose who clearly disapproves of your lack of fashion-forward sun protection. And as you drift further along the Nile's edge, you realize that even here, amidst odd remedies and quirky concoctions, the Egyptians' determination to thrive in their desert home feels strangely soothing. It's survival, yes, but with a touch of humor, and maybe even a whiff of sandalwood over the dung. You wander away from the shimmering, oily crowd and step into the shadow of towering stone walls. The heat outside gives way to a cool hush within, and suddenly the noise of the city melts into something softer. Temple chants at dawn. The air is heavy with incense, thick curls of smoke spiraling upward like lazy clouds. Your ears adjust to the echoing rhythm of low voices, priests humming in unison, as though the building itself were breathing. You pause, letting the sound seep into your bones, calming and hypnotic, like an ancient lullaby. One solid fact: Egyptian temples weren't simply places of prayer for the general public. They were the homes of gods on earth, tended carefully by trained priests. Only the priests entered the inner sanctums, where statues of deities were bathed, dressed, and offered food each day. To outsiders, this might have looked like a private club for divine caretakers. To Egyptians, it was essential, the act that kept the universe in balance. You picture yourself standing beside the entrance as priests glide past, their shaven heads glistening with oil, linen robes whispering softly. One carries a small tray with bread and beer for the god. Another swings a censer, releasing puffs of frankincense that sting your nose but soothe your mind. You cough politely, trying not to ruin the moment with a sneeze. The chants rise and fall, words long familiar to the priests but foreign to your ears. Still, the rhythm is almost musical, vibrating in the stone, echoing across chambers painted with lotus blossoms, falcons, and stars. Some hymns are hymns to Ra, the sun god, others to Amun or Isis or Hathor. Each name feels like a secret key whispered into the morning. Historians still argue whether the chants were meant as literal communication with the gods or as performances to maintain cosmic order, though in the echoing hush, the distinction hardly seems to matter. A quirky little detail: some rituals involved awakening statues by ritually opening their mouths. Priests would touch the lips of stone with sacred tools, breathing life into the carved figure for the day's ceremonies. You can imagine someone fumbling the delicate ritual, tapping the statue in the wrong place, and earning disapproving glares from colleagues. Even gods, it seems, expected good morning manners. Nearby, a priest sprinkles water from the Nile, its droplets catching the light like tiny gems. Egyptians believed this act purified both the space and the worshippers, linking them back to the river that sustained all life. You remember the washerwomen by the banks, scrubbing laundry at dawn, and realize that ritual purification and daily chores were not so different, both ways of making order out of the day. The smell of incense deepens as you move closer to the sanctuary. The fragrance is layered: sweet myrrh, smoky frankincense, sharp juniper. It clings to your skin, weaving itself into your imagination until you feel drowsy, drifting. The hum of voices continues, steady, like waves rolling on the sea. Your own breath slows to match the cadence, your shoulders relaxing with every repeated note. Historians still debate the accessibility of these rituals. Were common Egyptians able to hear the chants from outside, or were they completely excluded from the mysteries? Some argue that the sound carried deliberately, reaching the city's edge, reminding everyone that the gods were being honored. Others believe the rituals were private, cloistered away. You stand here, half in and half out, straining to listen, lulled by what you can hear.
You watch as a group of musicians joins in, their sistrums rattling with a metallic shimmer, drums thudding softly. The music twines with the voices like threads weaving into a tapestry. A priestess sways gently, her movements so slow they look like water rippling. The moment feels less like a performance and more like a sunrise, inevitable, steady, peaceful. Quirky little detail? Some rituals involved using food as offerings to the gods, setting out dishes of bread, meat, and fruit before the statues. Afterwards, the food was redistributed among temple staff. Imagine the gods nodding politely, letting the priests do all the eating. You can't help but smirk at the thought of a divine feast doubling as the world's earliest office lunch program. The light inside the temple shifts as the sun rises higher, spilling through narrow slits high in the walls. Dust motes drift lazily in the beams, glowing like tiny stars. For a moment, you feel as though you're standing inside the sky itself, wrapped in chants and incense, suspended between earth and eternity. Your eyelids grow heavy. The chants keep rolling, voices dipping low, then swelling like the tide, steady, predictable, endless. Somewhere outside, the city bustles on, but here the world narrows to sound, smoke, and stone. You rest against a cool wall, the vibrations of the chants humming through your back. And just when you think it might stop, it continues, soft, steady, and soothing, like an ancient lullaby meant not just for gods, but for anyone drifting nearby.
Hey guys, tonight we're slipping quietly into the hush of the desert night. Your feet sinking just a little into the sand, the sky so wide it could swallow a thought. You're walking alongside a slow-moving caravan under a pale moon, each camel carrying silk bundles, porcelain jars, and one very precious cargo, dried, crinkled leaves that smell faintly of rain and mountains. It's the scent of tea before it even had a name. Someone hums softly, another adjusts a rope, and the rhythm of hooves begins to sound like a heartbeat. You probably wouldn't survive this trip. It takes months, and the water is never quite enough. But don't worry, you're only traveling in imagination tonight. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is there, because right now, it's midnight somewhere along the Silk Road. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The desert isn't silent. Not really. The night air buzzes with invisible life. Crickets fiddle, someone's kettle whistles faintly on a distant campfire. You trudge alongside a dromedary that blinks at you, unimpressed. The man walking beside you, his robe dusty, his beard threaded with silver, tells you that he's been doing this route since before his eldest daughter could talk. He calls himself Yusuf, and his trade is simple: silk out, tea in. You glance at the sacks strapped to the camels and think, really, all this fuss for leaves? Yusuf chuckles when you ask. He says, but they aren't just leaves. They're conversation dried by sun. And that's when you realize what's moving through this caravan isn't just cargo, it's stories. Every stop on the Silk Road is like a social network, centuries before Wi-Fi. People gossip, they barter, they taste, they exchange names and half-truths. It's oddly comforting. A mainstream historical fact drifts into the talk. The Silk Road wasn't a single road at all, but a web of trade routes stretching thousands of miles, linking China with Persia, India, Arabia, and eventually Europe. Along these paths, not only silk traveled, but paper, spices, religion, and yes, tea. Historians still argue whether the word Silk Road even fits. It was coined only in the 19th century by a German geographer trying to simplify something too vast to name. The caravan halts. A fire crackles. You sit, hands warming around a chipped cup of earthy-smelling brew. It's bitter, but comforting, like a story that ends softly instead of neatly. The fringe tidbit Yusuf shares is that, according to old travelers' diaries, traders along this road could tell where a merchant came from just by sniffing their tea.
Tibetan tea smelt smoky, Chinese green tea grassy, Indian blends had a sweetness of rain-soaked wood. It was an olfactory passport. Somewhere behind you, someone sneezes loudly into the sand, and Yusuf mutters something about desert spirits being easily startled. You pretend you didn't hear. As you sip, the stars seem to multiply. The night becomes deeper, thicker, the kind of darkness that invites thought. You imagine what it must have been like for those first merchants, leaving the safety of the city for weeks or months on end. They followed familiar constellations, trusted half-remembered maps, and prayed that the next oasis still had water. The risk was enormous, yet they came, generation after generation, lured by profit and, maybe, by the gentle addiction of the road itself. The wind picks up. A faint line of music travels through the dunes, someone strumming a two-stringed instrument, maybe a dutar. The melody rises and falls lazily, as if the night itself were nodding off. You lean back, the sand still warm beneath you, and listen. Yusuf explains that the best tea from Yunnan was traded for fine horses from Fergannon, then for gems and cloth farther west. The trade routes braided cultures together. Even your cup, simple as it is, tells a global story. Porcelain perfected in Jingdezhen, glaze recipes guarded like royal secrets, each sip a quiet miracle of labor and geography. Historians still argue whether tea really left China as early as the 2nd century BCE or centuries later. The archaeological evidence is as fragile as the leaves themselves. Crumbled bits found in ancient tombs, a faint residue in ceramic jars. You picture someone long ago, sitting with the same puzzled look you have now, wondering how something so small could travel so far. A sleepy laugh rises from another fire. Someone jokes that camels gossip too, that they remember every trader who's ever packed them wrong. Yusuf rolls his eyes and says that might explain why his camel refuses to look at him tonight. You chuckle quietly. It's the kind of a low humor that keeps a caravan sane. A faint memory of home crosses your mind. Something about your own bedtime rituals. A mug, a sound, a certain scent. Here, thousands of years ago, the same human craving for comfort hums through the camp. Tea is more than a drink. It's a pause. The desert wind cools. Sand grains whisper against the tents. The fire dies low, embers pulsing like tiny hearts. Someone murmurs a prayer in a language you don't know. And as you lie back, staring at the endless sky, you realize that this trade route, the one that carried silk and spices and gossip, also carried something else. The idea that life, no matter how far from home, could be steeped slowly into peace. You're almost asleep, your mind steeping too. The night's warmth fades into a mild chill. You pull your cloak tighter and close your eyes, hearing only the rhythmic grunt of camels and the faint hiss of wind through dunes. The first step of the world's biggest story has begun. One sip, one step, one whispered rumor. Morning creeps in softly across the desert, brushing light over the dunes like a hand smoothing out a blanket. You wake up to the sound of kettle lids clinking, water bubbling, and the low hum of traders preparing to move again. There's a faint tang of smoke in the air mixed with something green and floral, the tea that started it all. Yusuf offers you a small clay cup, the steam curling like a spirit. He says, "This leaf came from Yunnan, where the mountains breathe clouds." You take a sip. It's sharper now, earthy, alive. As you drink, you follow his story backwards, tracing the journey of the humble Camellia sinensis plant to its wild origins. The misty hills of Yunnan, deep in southwestern China, are the cradle of tea. Imagine narrow terraces carved into mountain slopes, trees heavy with glossy leaves, and farmers moving slowly through the fog like ghosts. Tea didn't start in neat plantations. It began as a wild shrub, half weed, half miracle. Monkeys and birds nibbled at its leaves long before people realized they could boil them for comfort. Historians still argue whether tea was first used as medicine or as a simple pick-me-up. One camp says it began with healers chewing leaves to ease fatigue. Another insists farmers discovered its magic by accident, when leaves fell into boiling water. Either way, someone took a sip, paused, and thought, "That's not bad." You picture that first accidental brew,
Wood smoke, a cracked pot, the hiss of rain on coals. The drinker probably didn't call it tea or cha or te. It was just warmth, something to hold in both hands. Here comes your first cheeky joke of the morning. You probably wouldn't last 10 minutes in that forest. Between the leeches, humidity, and mysterious buzzing things, you'd be reconsidering civilization. But you'd smell the tea even through the mud, the faint citrusy edge of young leaves drying in the sun. Yusuf tells you legends as the caravan begins to pack. There's the tale of Emperor Shen Nong, the mythical ruler who demanded all water be boiled before drinking. One day, a few leaves blew into his pot, turning it golden. He tasted it, liked it, and declared it a gift from heaven. It's the story so famous that every Chinese child learns it. Yet historians still debate whether Shen Nong ever existed. He's like the George Washington of beverage myths, useful, dignified, and almost certainly embellished. You walk alongside the caravan again. The camels grunt like disgruntled librarians. You ask Yusuf whether tea has always been this important. He nods slowly. In Yunnan, they drink it with salt. In Sichuan, with pepper. It's food, not drink. That's your quirky tidbit of the day. Early tea wasn't sipped delicately. It was cooked into soup with garlic, ginger, or even onions. Imagine that serving at your next brunch. The sun rises higher, turning the dunes pink, then gold. You squint ahead as the caravan snakes across the sand. Each step feels like time itself dragging forward. You realize that tea, like these journeys, depends on patience. It can't be rushed. It has to steep. By midday, you reach a small oasis town. Palms rustle over mud brick homes. A few traders greet Yusuf with cheerful shouts. They've met before. In this world, everyone knows everyone. There's a tea house here, low-roofed and cool inside. You duck in to escape the glare. The air smells of straw mats, smoke, and that unmistakable leaf. The owner pours boiling water from a battered kettle into a tall clay jar. The liquid blooms from clear to amber, like sunrise in miniature. He doesn't stir, doesn't rush, just watches. You realize that tea isn't just a drink, it's a pace, a philosophy, maybe even a rebellion against urgency. A group of traders nearby are debating loudly, something about whether Yunnan tea or Sichuan tea fetches higher prices in Samarkand. Historians still argue about this too. Which region truly birthed the culture of tea trade?
The caravan rolls on, and soon the clay plains give way to a patchwork of rocky ridges and sun-baked valleys. You trudge alongside Yusuf, dust swirling around your ankles, carrying the faint scent of tea from the jars that bob gently on the camels' backs. The terrain is rougher now, and each step feels deliberate, a meditation in motion. You notice how the sunlight plays across the rocks, turning them from rusty red to pale gold, and imagine that the same travelers you follow may have paused here centuries ago, squinting against the glare and wondering whether the oasis ahead actually exists. Soon you arrive at a small Persian-style courtyard, the first sign of urban life in days. Low, sun-bleached walls frame an inner garden, and a fountain trickles a soft song of moving water. Orange trees sway lazily, releasing fragrant bursts of blossom into the still air. A few merchants linger, their voices soft but purposeful, bartering in a language that seems musical even to your untrained ears. This is one of those places where goods, ideas, and news converge, the very heart of the Silk Road's network. Yusuf motions you to sit on a sun-warmed stone bench beneath a latticework trellis. He begins to tell you about Sogdian traders, the masters of cultural exchange and rumor, who often acted as intermediaries between Chinese and Persian merchants. These traders didn't just move silk and spices, they were historians, diplomats, and most importantly, gossip carriers. A fact to savor, the Sogdians were so influential that their language and scripts spread along the Silk Road, leaving traces as far as the Mediterranean. Historians still argue whether they were truly the glue of East-West commerce, or if their importance has been exaggerated by romantic accounts of the Silk Road. As you sip a strong, bitter brew from a small porcelain cup, Yusuf leans in with a grin. "You know," he says, "some tea houses in these courtyards had more secrets than the emperor's palace. People whispered and letters were passed quietly between pots of tea." That's your quirky tidbit. Tea served as a kind of social lubricant, where the right sip could start negotiations, end disputes, or even determine who inherited a caravan route. You probably won't survive reading these secret histories, but at least your imagination does. The courtyard feels alive with subtle rhythms, the soft tap of feet on stone, the chatter of distant merchants, the rustle of leaves above. You watch a small child chase a stray cat, laughing as the feline darts through the shadows. It's easy to see why tea and conversation were inseparable here. Each cup is not just a drink, but a prelude to stories, disputes, and delicate diplomacy. Yusuf describes the ceremonial etiquette of pouring tea, learned from years of observing Persian customs. One must tilt the cup just so, allow the leaves to swirl gently, and never, ever rush. The gesture conveys respect, patience, and an unspoken understanding of the social hierarchy. Historians still argue whether these rituals were genuinely symbolic or largely performative, but in this moment, as you mirror the motion, it feels meaningful enough. Outside the courtyard, the wind picks up slightly, carrying the scent of far-off spices and distant deserts. You close your eyes briefly, letting it swirl around you like a gentle veil. The aroma of the tea mingles with orange blossoms and dust, creating a strange but comforting cocktail of memory and place. A merchant seated nearby leans toward you and whispers about the tea code, a set of signs and gestures that could communicate trade secrets or warnings without a word being spoken. It's a reminder that this network of tea and gossip is subtle, layered, and quietly powerful. You can almost imagine messages hopping from cup to cup, caravan to caravan, whispering of fortunes gained or lost, of new alliances forming across continents. You take another slow sip, savoring the warmth that spreads from your hands to your chest. For a moment, you feel suspended in time, walking the same pathways, observing the same rituals, and tasting the same leaves that countless traders and travelers have encountered over centuries. The courtyard isn't just a resting place, it's a microcosm of the Silk Road itself, commerce, culture, and human curiosity interwoven with tea. As the sun tilts westward, casting long shadows across the courtyard, you rise with Yusuf to continue the journey. The camels are restless, and the road beckons once more. You glance back at the fountain and orange trees, knowing that somewhere beneath those branches, countless stories, some true, some embellished, have begun to travel the world just as surely as tea. The heat of the afternoon has softened into a golden glow as the caravan winds through a narrow valley, dust settling over your shoulders like a gentle shawl. You trudge alongside Yusuf, the rhythmic plod of the camels almost hypnotic, and notice that the air feels slightly cooler here, scented faintly with wild herbs growing between the stones. Somewhere a bird calls, its note echoing against the cliffs, and you think, not for the first time, how remarkably alive this desert feels when you're moving through it at the pace of history. Yusuf begins to speak about monks traveling along these trade routes, carrying not just scriptures but tales and techniques for brewing tea. Some were ascetics, walking barefoot for days, others scholars, pausing only to exchange a cup or a word. The mainstream historical fact is that Buddhist monks were instrumental in spreading tea northward into China and eventually into Japan. Their journeys intertwined meditation, commerce, and the simple pleasure of a warm beverage. Historians still argue whether tea was originally valued more for its caffeine or its sacred symbolism, but either way, it became a spiritual companion. You pause to sip from your own cup, inhaling the earthy aroma. Yusuf's voice softens as he begins telling one of his favorite stories about a monk who, traveling through the desert with a small caravan, would sprinkle powdered tea into his sandals to stay alert on long marches.
You laugh softly at the absurdity. The caravan around you hums with quiet activity. A camel sneezes. A trader whispers a secret. A child laughs at a scuttling lizard. It's easy to see why tea and conversation were inseparable here. Each cup is not just a drink, but a linnets to landigans, engine disputes, or even give ministration to men's long thoughts. Historians still argue whether monks deliberately created tea culture to aid meditation, or if it simply grew organically as a companion to long, arduous journeys. Either way, the connection between travel, gossip, and tea is undeniable. You feel it yourself. Moving with the caravan, the world reduced to a few square miles of sand, stone, and ritual. As evening approaches, the golden light fades to soft pink, and the shadows stretch long across the valley. The air is cooler, carrying the faint scent of distant oases. You sip your final cup for the day, letting the warmth linger in your chest. The caravan stirs once more, preparing to move before darkness falls. You glance at Yusuf, the camels, the path ahead, and feel a gentle serenity wash over you. A small taste of the centuries of ritual, travel, and stories carried along this road.
By the third day, the dunes begin to flatten into hard-packed clay, and the air smells faintly of salt. You can see the shimmer of heat lifting off the horizon like a mirage. The caravan has entered Tong territory now, 8th century China at its most cosmopolitan, where tea was no longer just a curiosity from Yunnan, but the quiet heartbeat of an empire. You trudge beside Yusuf, your sandals scraping the earth, and he begins to tell you about the tea houses of Chang'an, the Tong capital, now known as Xi'an. Imagine it. Streets buzzing with camels, scholars, soldiers, poets, musicians, and perfumers from across Asia. The city glows with red lanterns and smells of jasmine, sesame oil, and the faint, grassy sweetness of roasted tea. Everyone drinks it, Yusuf says, tightening a strap. From monks to magistrates, poets to postal couriers. They say a man without tea is a door without hinges. You grin at that. A door without hinges sounds like your mornings before caffeine.
You wander away from the shimmering, oily crowd and step into the shadow of towering stone walls. The heat outside gives way to a cool hush within, and suddenly the noise of the city melts into something softer. Temple chants at dawn. The air is heavy with incense, thick curls of smoke spiraling upward like lazy clouds. Your ears adjust to the echoing rhythm of low voices, priests humming in unison, as though the building itself were breathing. You pause, letting the sound seep into your bones, calming and hypnotic, like an ancient lullaby. One solid fact: Egyptian temples weren't simply places of prayer for the general public. They were the homes of gods on earth, tended carefully by trained priests. Only the priests entered the inner sanctums, where statues of deities were bathed, dressed, and offered food each day. To outsiders, this might have looked like a private club for divine caretakers. To Egyptians, it was essential, the act that kept the universe in balance. You picture yourself standing beside the entrance as priests glide past, their shaven heads glistening with oil, linen robes whispering softly. One carries a small tray with bread and beer for the god. Another swings a censer, releasing puffs of frankincense that sting your nose but soothe your mind. You cough politely, trying not to ruin the moment with a sneeze. The chants rise and fall, words long familiar to the priests but foreign to your ears. Still, the rhythm is almost musical, vibrating in the stone, echoing across chambers painted with lotus blossoms, falcons, and stars. Some hymns are hymns to Ra, the sun god, others to Amun or Isis or Hathor. Each name feels like a secret key whispered into the morning.
Historians still argue whether the chants were meant as literal communication with the gods or as performances to maintain cosmic order, though in the echoing hush, the distinction hardly seems to matter. A quirky little detail, some rituals involved awakening statues by ritually opening their mouths. Priests would touch the lips of stone with sacred tools, breathing life into the carved figure for the day's ceremonies. You can imagine someone fumbling the delicate ritual, tapping the statue in the wrong place, and earning disapproving glares from colleagues. Even gods, it seems, expected good morning manners. Nearby, a priest sprinkles water from the Nile, its droplets catching the light like tiny gems. Egyptians believed this act purified both the space and the worshippers, linking them back to the river that sustained all life. You remember the washerwomen by the banks, scrubbing laundry at dawn, and realize that ritual purification and daily chores were not so different, both ways of making order out of the day. The smell of incense deepens as you move closer to the sanctuary. The fragrance is layered: sweet myrrh, smoky frankincense, sharp juniper. It clings to your skin, weaving itself into your imagination until you feel drowsy, drifting. The hum of voices continues, steady, like waves rolling on the sea. Your own breath slows to match the cadence, your shoulders relaxing with every repeated note. Historians still debate the accessibility of these rituals. Were common Egyptians able to hear the chants from outside, or were they completely excluded from the mysteries? Some argue that the sound carried deliberately, reaching the city's edge, reminding everyone that the gods were being honored. Others believe the rituals were private, cloistered away. You stand here, half in and half out, straining to listen, lulled by what you can hear. You watch as a group of musicians joins in, their sistrums rattling with a metallic shimmer, drums thudding softly. The music twines with the voices like threads weaving into a tapestry. A priestess sways gently, her movements so slow they look like water rippling. The moment feels less like a performance and more like a sunrise, inevitable, steady, peaceful. Quirky little detail? Some rituals involved using food as offerings to the gods, setting out dishes of bread, meat, and fruit before the statues. Afterwards, the food was redistributed among temple staff. Imagine the gods nodding politely, letting the priests do all the eating. You can't help but smirk at the thought of a divine feast doubling as the world's earliest office lunch program. The light inside the temple shifts as the sun rises higher, spilling through narrow slits high in the walls. Dust motes drift lazily in the beams, glowing like tiny stars. For a moment, you feel as though you're standing inside the sky itself, wrapped in chants and incense, suspended between earth and eternity. Your eyelids grow heavy. The chants keep rolling, voices dipping low, then swelling like the tide, steady, predictable, endless. Somewhere outside, the city bustles on, but here the world narrows to sound, smoke, and stone. You rest against a cool wall, the vibrations of the chants humming through your back. And just when you think it might stop, it continues, soft, steady, and soothing, like an ancient lullaby meant not just for gods, but for anyone drifting nearby.
By now, the heat presses down like a heavy blanket, and you shade your eyes with one hand as you step into a field where workers are slathering something suspicious on their arms. At first glance, it looks like mud. Then you notice the smell, a sharp, earthy tang mixed with something faintly unpleasant. You squint, realizing you're watching people rub a concoction of crocodile dung and fermented plant matter across their skin. This, you realize, is sunscreen, or at least their best attempt at it. You're grateful for modern SPF, but the Egyptians seem determined to improvise. One fact historians agree on: the Egyptian sun was brutal, and protection was necessary. They wore lightweight linen and wide collars, but bare skin still faced the rays.
Mixtures of animal fats, oils, and plant extracts often doubled as moisturizers and sun barriers. Crocodile dung is one of those stranger recipes mentioned in later texts, though scholars still argue whether it was ever widespread or more symbolic, some quirky remedy offered to wealthy households with access to crocodiles. Either way, imagine sitting under the sun with that smeared across your shoulders, trying to look dignified. The smell aside, you can almost admire the creativity. These people experimented constantly with mixtures. Oils from castor beans, sesame, and moringa were common, along with red ochre rubbed on cheeks not just for beauty, but for added protection. In effect, they layered style and survival together, wearing cosmetics like a second skin against the desert. Nearby, a farmer sits with his sandals off, coating his feet in a mixture of honey and animal fat, muttering about cracked heels. You wrinkle your nose at the stickiness, but honey was a prized healing agent. The Egyptians knew it slowed infections, and modern science nods in agreement. A quirky little miracle hidden in the same ingredient you'd drizzle on toast. Children chase each other in the dust, their heads gleaming with oil that serves as both sunblock and pest repellent. One boy, gleeful, smears his face with more than he probably needs, ending up shiny as a polished jar. His mother sighs, scrubs at him with a cloth, and the crowd chuckles. Clearly, kids wasting sunscreen isn't a new phenomenon. It's been happening for millennia. Historians still debate how much of these recipes were daily habits versus ritual acts tied to gods and magic. Was crocodile dung really believed to protect, or was it more about invoking Sobek, the crocodile god, for strength? A mixture of science and faith ran through all Egyptian remedies. After all, if you believed the gods guarded you, maybe you felt cooler even when the sun baked your shoulders. As the heat rises, you find shade beneath the palm tree, watching people reapply their concoctions. The mixture glistens in the sunlight, creating an odd shimmer, almost like scales. Perhaps that was intentional, a way of blending with nature, wearing the shimmer of the Nile's creatures as armor against the day. A merchant strolls by, carrying jars of perfumed oil. He shouts about their benefits, comparing his wares to ordinary dung-based remedies. You suppress a laugh, realizing you've just witnessed the world's first sunscreen marketing battle. The crowd gathers, sniffing the jars, bartering over prices, and choosing between smells like roses and smells like crocodile enclosure. The choice, you suspect, is an easy one. You lean back, lulled by the mix of voices and the sound of cicadas buzzing in the reeds. The smell isn't exactly relaxing, though if you focus on the myrrh and sandalwood oils, you can almost pretend. Still, part of you can't stop thinking about the unfortunate worker whose job it was to collect crocodile dung in the first place. Imagine telling your family that's your career, official crocodile collector. Sleepy or not, that's a title no resume should have to bear. And yet, it worked in its way. Oils, fats, and strange mixtures shielded skin, warded off insects, and gave people the comfort of feeling prepared against the desert. Beneath the humor lies a truth. Survival often depends on strange creativity. Even if the method smells awful, it represents resilience, trial and error, the constant negotiation between human bodies and a sun that never stops shining. The day stretches on, the air shimmering with heat. Farmers wipe their brows, women adjust their headscarves, and children dart between patches of shade, still shiny with oil. You feel your own skin prickle in sympathy, grateful for your imaginary sunscreen, though maybe you'll pass on the crocodile dung recipe. Instead, you let yourself be carried along by the gentle rhythm of everyday care, the buzz of insects, and the occasional squawk of a goose who clearly disapproves of your lack of fashion-forward sun protection. And as you drift further along the Nile's edge, you realize that even here, amidst odd remedies and quirky concoctions, the Egyptians' determination to thrive in their desert home feels strangely soothing. It's survival, yes, but with a touch of humor, and maybe even a whiff of sandalwood over the dung.